Chào mừng quý vị đã đến với câu chuyện kinh doanh trên Fbnc. Thưa quý vị, chương trình hôm nay sẽ là cuộc trao đổi về chủ đề quỹ mở, một phương thức đầu tư hiệu quả tại Việt Nam. Và khách mời đến với cuộc trò chuyện ngày hôm nay xin được giới thiệu đến quý vị ông Fbnc Nói là Tổng Giám đốc và kiêm Giám đốc đầu tư của quỹ VCBF. Trước khi đến với phần trao đổi với khách mời quý vị theo dõi một đoạn clip ngắn sau đây.
Nếu như vào thời điểm đầu năm, nhiều nhà quản lý quỹ vẫn còn tỏ ra khá e ngại với triển vọng của quỹ mở, thì cho đến tháng 8 năm nay, thị trường khá bất ngờ với thông tin đã có 15 quỹ mở đang hoạt động. Trong đó chỉ riêng tháng 8 đã có đến 3 quỹ mở mới gia nhập thị trường. Quỹ mở là một hình thức quỹ mà các nhà đầu tư góp vốn cho một mục đích đầu tư chung trong một khoảng thời gian không giới hạn. Thị trường tài chính sau mấy năm lao đao đã sàng lọc dần các nhà đầu tư và sẽ rất khó cho những ai muốn tự đầu tư chứng khoán mà lại không hiểu biết cặn kẽ về lĩnh vực này. Do đó, sự ra đời của các quỹ mở có thể đáp ứng nhu cầu của những nhà đầu tư vừa muốn tham gia loại hình đầu tư có tiềm năng lợi nhuận cao nhưng không am hiểu tài chính và cũng không có nhiều thời gian theo dõi thị trường. Dù thực tế chưa ai có thể vẽ ra bức tranh rõ nét hơn cho tương lai của quỹ mở tại Việt Nam, nhưng thực tế, quỹ mở đã và đang là xu hướng phổ biến, chiếm 80% tổng số các quỹ đầu tư đang hoạt động trên thế giới hiện nay. Và điều đáng chú ý là quỹ mở đang có tiềm năng rất lớn tại Việt Nam, nơi mà có đến hơn 90% số nhà đầu tư là cá nhân nhỏ lẻ.
Hi Fbnc. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Okay, today we will talk about open-ended fund. So first of all, just go over the definition of what is an open-ended fund.
Sure. An open-ended fund, as the word suggests, is open as opposed to closed. And what that means is an investor can come into the fund and invest in the fund at any time and can exit or redeem from the fund at any time. Mm-hmm. This is different from a closed-end fund wherein you have one opportunity to come into the fund and then you have to wait till the entire life of the fund before you can redeem your shares.
Up to date, total so far we have 15 open-ended funds. So are you surprised of the fast development of the market?
You know, we're not surprised by the development of the market in Vietnam. Vietnam has a very young population and 90 million people, and you've got 13 million households that have a monthly income greater than 20 million dong per month. That is a pretty healthy sized market, and all these families are looking for ways to increase their wealth. And the traditional sources of wealth creation are starting to kind of slow down or not provide the returns that they were previously getting. So I'm very, very certain that you're going to continue to see an increase in the number of funds that are going to be launched in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Well, for Vietnam, it's a very small market. And so far we have 15 of them. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be so hard for you guys to compete with others?
I'm not really concerned about competition, partly because I think competition is good for the customer. Mm-hmm. It brings out the best in any industry.
Right.
I mean, the more competition you have, the better products you have. The better products you have, the more beneficial it is for the customers. Mm-hmm. As far as it goes for VCBF, we're less concerned about it because when we've got support from two very, very strong parents, so if you look at Franklin Templeton, which is a global asset manager based in the US, right. We've got a tremendous amount of experience from Franklin Templeton. Franklin Templeton's been in the investment business for over 65 years and is a global manager. So we have access to all that research and experience. And then when you marry that with a trusted name like Vietcom Bank, you have a combination that is very, very strong.
Right.
I mean, I'll go back and say Franklin Templeton has over 550 investment professionals all over the globe. And our team in Vietnam has the ability to tap into that knowledge base. Mm-hmm. So the advantage is pretty strong for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the last 8 months of this year, VN Index has increased like 25%. And now you have a new product coming out. Mm-hmm. Is it difficult for you to attract investors?
I think the fact that the VN Index has gone up is more a recognition that Vietnam had been forgotten by a lot of investors.
Right.
And so I think that is coming back. But if you look at the long term, which is what we do as investors,
Right.
I'm extremely bullish about the long-term prospects of Vietnam. If you look at, I mentioned earlier, the demographics or the population, 90 million, over 60% of them are under the age of 30.
Right.
But if you look at it even on the economy itself of Vietnam, I mean, GDP growth has stabilized, which is, some argue it's not such a good thing because we're not seeing growth. My point is that if you look around, there aren't that many countries that are growing that fast. And Vietnam has got 5.5% GDP growth, which is, yes, compared to the previous 7.5+%,
Right.
it looks low. But 5.5% is still very, very strong. So I think that is different. Then you look at interest rates, they've come down significantly. So as that goes down, you are more of a tendency to invest or start to buy. And then finally, I think valuations are very cheap compared to anywhere else in the region. So when I look at the growth prospects and you look at valuation, longer term, I think Vietnam is in a very, very strong position.
Well, you have a new product, so your strategy is to attract individual or institutional investors.
It's open to both, but the two products that we have, two funds that we have, they are targeted primarily for individual investors. And it's a mechanism to allow them to start building their wealth and start to save.
Okay, look at the outlook of the market for the next 5 years. What is your expectation on it?
When we're looking at the open-ended fund industry itself in total, currently Vietnam has a total assets under management in the industry of between 90 and 95 million US dollars. If, for example, if you look at China as an example, China opened up their open-ended fund industry in 1999. And within 5 years, open-ended funds were the largest individual investment vehicle in China. And by 2011, the total assets in the industry were 450 billion US dollars. And that accounted for approximately 5.8% of their GDP at the time. Now, the story is pretty similar across Asia. I mean, if you look at, on average, the open-ended fund industry or mutual fund industry accounts for 9% of GDP. Now, if we look deeper in, let's say, Southeast Asia, if you look at, let's say, Indonesia and the Philippines, which are the smaller markets, even there, the size of the market is about 2.5% of GDP. So if we are to assume that we have somewhere between 2.5% of GDP and 9% of GDP for Vietnam, you're talking about a size of the market of anywhere from 4 to 12 billion.
Wow.
Now, well, our expectation, since you asked about the next 5 years, right? My sense is that within the next 5 years, we'll be somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 billion in terms of total assets for the industry.
Well, that's the first part of our talk today. In the second part, we will talk about your financial advisory. Vừa rồi là phần 1 của câu chuyện kinh doanh. Chúng tôi sẽ quay trở lại sau ít phút nữa với phần 2. Chào mừng quý vị đến với phần 2 của câu chuyện kinh doanh. Okay, Avinash, welcome back to the second part of the show.
Thank you.
We know the majority of trading here in Vietnam is for retail investor. So you have a new product coming out. What are the advantages of your product to this kind of investors?
Sure. An open-ended fund is a product that is open to any investor, whether you're an experienced trader or you have absolutely no experience whatsoever and you're coming into the stock market for the first time.
Really?
It is, yeah, because I think the idea and the advantage of having an open-ended fund or investing in an open-ended fund is, firstly, it is professionally managed. So you do not have to know anything about any company. What you have to make sure is that the manager that you select is a good one. So not only is it professionally managed, our investment style is more long-term in nature.
Right.
So we don't necessarily look at the next 60 days, 90 days. 6 months. We look out 3 to 5 years and try to identify which are the good investments, who's going to do well, and then make our investments accordingly. So you get the benefit of joining into that long-term investment strategy. Next, it's diversification. So as an individual, if you were to try and do this, you'd be able to maybe track 1 or 2 companies, maybe 4, if you're really good, 5 or 6.
Right.
In our portfolio, on average, there are between 20 and 25 companies. And we have a research staff of over 10 people that focus on this and develop this. So as an investor in an open-ended fund, you'd get access, essentially, to all that research that we do through the open-ended fund. The next advantage is liquidity. I mean, it's an issue that I think is very important for a lot of investors.
Right.
You can trade an open-ended fund anytime you want. The way we've set it up is once a week, we have an NAV that you can either buy or you can sell it back or redeem it at. So that's your liquidity right there. In terms of flexibility, you have the flexibility to invest in different kinds of funds depending on the strategy that you want to focus on.
Right.
So if you want to focus on more of a conservative type strategy, you'd go into our tactical balanced fund. If you want to have a little more aggressive strategy or you want to be focused more on equities, you'd go into our blue chip fund.
Right.
And then finally, I'd say transparency. I mean, everything that we do is public. Every report that we publish is public. There's no situation where the investor doesn't know what it is that we're doing, what it is that we're investing in. On a monthly basis, all our reports are published with the State Securities Commission. I would actually say those are 4 important ones.
Okay.
But I'd say the key one is actually being professionally managed.
All right, got it.
Because that is the difference between you and I trying to do this on our own as opposed to having professionals that have access to information, that have access to the companies and can essentially do a lot more research.
Well, I understand that you guys have blue chip fund. Share with us more about the type of fund.
Blue chip essentially is a name that goes with trying to show quality. So when we look at blue chip and when we're talking about high quality, that high quality can come from multiple different sources. It can be high quality management of the investment companies that we're looking at. It could be high quality revenue. It could be high quality profits. So we look at essentially companies that we think meet our high quality definition. And typically these companies tend to be the larger ones in the market.
So what is the benchmark return of this blue chip fund?
So all our funds have different benchmarks. Now, for the blue chip fund in particular, the benchmark is the VN 100, which is essentially the top 100 companies in Vietnam. And while it is our benchmark, we tend not to focus as much on the benchmark itself. What we do is focus on research. So we try to find the best companies that are going to give us the best returns. Now, sometimes they're in the benchmark, sometimes they're not going to be in the benchmark.
Right.
But what we try to do is essentially take a look at each company and decide whether it is a good investment or not.
Well, every fund has different risk and doesn't apply to all investors. So what kind of investor is more suitable for your blue chip fund?
Blue chip fund is it's open to pretty much any investor that is looking to increase their wealth over the long term, 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
Because we look at it as investors, we're looking for companies that are going to give us a return in 3 to 5 years. And it's not just a small return, we're looking for outsized returns, right? So what we want is investors that invest in our fund that also have a similar target and a similar goal and a similar objective. Now, if we're looking at companies that are going to provide us a longer term return, and that is your target in terms of growing your wealth over the next 3 to 5 years, it's the ideal fund. Now, given that it is a general equity strategy, I think the blue chip fund should be part of a core portfolio in any investor strategy.
Vừa rồi là phần 2 của câu chuyện kinh doanh. Xin mời quý vị giải lao trong giây lát trước khi đến với phần cuối cùng của chương trình.
Khác với giai đoạn đầu, nhiều quỹ mở chủ yếu chỉ tập trung vào trái phiếu hoặc theo tỷ lệ 50-50, nghĩa là tỷ trọng dành cho loại tài sản an toàn này vẫn chiếm đến phần nửa. Thì nay hình thức quỹ mở chỉ đầu tư vào cổ phiếu đã đánh dấu sự có mặt của mình trên thị trường. Đơn cử như quỹ đầu tư cổ phiếu hàng đầu VCBF, gọi tắt là VCBF-BCF. Với mức vốn điều lệ hơn 59 tỷ đồng của liên doanh quản lý quỹ Vietcombank Franklin Templeton Investment. Đáng chú ý, VCBF-BCF đầu tư đến 100% giá trị tài sản ròng vào cổ phiếu niêm yết, chủ yếu là từ cổ phiếu vốn hóa lớn và thanh khoản tốt. Điều này dường như đang cho thấy sự linh hoạt của nhà quản lý quỹ khi nhanh chóng bắt nhịp xu thế tăng trưởng mạnh mẽ của thị trường cổ phiếu thời gian gần đây. Trong đó, vai trò dẫn dắt thị trường của các blue chip là không thể phủ nhận.
Tôi đầu tư vô quỹ VCBF là người ta có cái đội ngũ chuyên nghiệp, nên người ta sẽ sử dụng cái đồng tiền mà mình gửi cho họ đầu tư nó sẽ hiệu quả hơn.
Và vì là quỹ mở nên nhà đầu tư có thể tin rằng với một số tiền nhỏ, khoản đầu tư vẫn được đa dạng hóa vào nhiều cổ phiếu. Quỹ cũng chú trọng tạo ra lợi nhuận lâu dài thông qua việc đầu tư các công ty có vốn hóa lớn. Do đó, chứng chỉ quỹ có thể là danh mục cổ phiếu chủ chốt cho nhà đầu tư với thời gian đầu tư từ 3 đến 5 năm hoặc thậm chí là lâu hơn. Tất nhiên, trong trường hợp khẩn cấp, khi nhà đầu tư cần tiền đột xuất, việc rút một phần hoặc toàn bộ số tiền đầu tư cũng rất dễ dàng.
Đầu tư vào cái quỹ này thì thông thường là nên nghĩ tới cái chuyện dài hạn hơn. Đó, những cái đồng tiền mà mình để tích lũy trong cái dài hạn thì mình thay vì để ở một số kênh đầu tư khác thì có thể là cái sự sinh lợi nó không cao. Đó, gửi vào những cái có một cái đội ngũ chuyên nghiệp như thế thì có thể mình kỳ vọng được cái sinh lợi tốt.
Thống kê từ nhiều nước cho thấy, nhà đầu tư của các quỹ mở có đầu tư vào cổ phiếu sẽ có khả năng nhận được lợi nhuận sẽ cao hơn khi đầu tư dài hạn, kể cả sau khi đã bù trừ giá đồng tiền.
Chào mừng quý vị đã đến với phần cuối cùng của câu chuyện kinh doanh. Welcome back to the last part of the show.
Thank you.
Well, in this part, we will talk about the long-term strategy of VCBF Blue Chip Fund. Okay, but the first question I want to ask you is that what is so special about your strategy of this fund?
We at VCBF, our blue chip fund investment strategy is similar to our other equity investment strategies. In that, it is what we call is a bottom-up approach.
Okay.
Now, what a bottom-up approach is we look at a given company and try to understand the merits and risks of each individual company. So what maybe might be helpful is if I just explain the whole process that we go through in terms of how we do research. So we look at industries. There are different industries: food and beverage, steel, construction, real estate. You look at all the different industries, and then we have screening mechanisms and parameters that we use to sort through and find which are the best ones in this industry. Once we've identified those, then we look for each individual merit, each individual company to see how good or bad they are. What that involves is looking at in financials, meeting the management, going and talking to their customers, talking to their suppliers, really trying to understand each individual company and how
It's
strong
more about
they are.
operation, right?
Exactly. It's understanding how they work, what makes them better than anybody else in their industry.
Yeah.
Once we've done that, then we try to assign a value. So we'll try to make projections. We look at financials and we try to make projections based on what we think is the growth in the industry, what kind of market share a particular company can get, and then how well they can turn that around. So whether they're good at sales, whether they're good at marketing, how does that all transfer? And then we arrive at a intrinsic value, which is what we say, this company is worth this in 3 years. Then we look at that and say, okay, what is the current price today? If the current price is below what we think is the value, then that's a buy decision. If it is not below, then what we'll do is we put it on a list that we say we track it because it is a good company, and then hopefully in the future, at whatever point in time the market gets scared, they bring the price down and we can then participate in it. But when we're looking at intrinsic value, we do one additional thing, which is we do an macro overlay.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is to take a look at the overall economy and see how that is functioning. So are there things that are changing in the Vietnamese economy that are going to affect this industry or affect this company? So if you look at WTO, or more recently it's the TPP,
FTA,
or any of the FTAs being discussed, right? So how do those things impact a particular industry, and then how does it impact this particular company? So once we get comfortable with that, we then have a good enough backdrop to decide, okay, are we going to invest in this? How long do we need to invest in this? And what is our typical exit going to look like?
right. Well, for your VCBF blue chip fund, you have a bottom-up strategy. What is so successful compared to other strategies?
You know, there are a lot of strategies out there, and what we found is bottom-up investment strategy works for us.
Okay.
And it's also what Franklin Templeton does very well and has done that for years. And I think one of the hallmarks of a bottom-up strategy is research. And the more research you do...
You mean equity research?
Equity research, yeah. The more research you do on the companies, the better off you feel about that investment, the more knowledge you have about that investment. And where that becomes really important is when the market panics.
Well, we mentioned about the liquidity earlier. How easy it is for investors to move their money in and out of your blue chip funds?
So we understand that there are, ideally, we'd never want you to leave,
Okay.
right, as an investor.
Yep.
But we understand, I mean, there are going to be emergencies, there are going to be things where you need money in a short. You can redeem from an open-ended fund, from our blue chip fund, on a weekly basis. So there is, whatever the NAV is at that time of withdrawal, you can withdraw your shares or units at that price.
Okay. Well, I understand that you have another fund called Tactical Balance Fund, and you guys have a systematic investment plan. Share with us more about this plan.
Sure. The systematic investment plan is a idea that came from Franklin Templeton.
Okay.
The basic concept is that every month or every quarter, you put aside a little amount of money towards your long-term goal. Whatever that long-term goal is, if you're saving up to buy a house, if you're saving up to buy a motorbike,
Right.
if you're saving for your children's education, whatever it is, it has to start with doing something regularly. So it could be as little as $1 million a month.
Okay.
But the key is to do it every month. So what happens when you're doing it on a monthly basis? It puts you in the habit of saving regularly. Secondly, it does what we call dong cost averaging. So what I mean by that is, an open-ended fund, your NAV is a function of what's going on with the market and your underlying investments.
Yep.
So when the market is up, your NAV is up. So if you, for example, as an investor, are putting in 1 million dong every month, in month one, let's say the NAV is 100 dong. So you're getting X amount of units that you're buying. Next month, the NAV, not from 100, it goes to 1,000. But you're still only putting in your 1 million dong every month. So what is going to happen? You're going to buy that many less units. Now let's go to month 3. The NAV goes from 1,000, it goes to 500.
Right.
Now all of a sudden, your 1 million dong is buying you that many more units. So without you as an investor doing anything other than sticking to your 1 million dong every month, you are averaging down. So when the market's up, you're buying less because it is theoretically expensive. And when the market goes down, it's cheaper, so you're buying more units.
Right.
So it gives you that advantage without really doing anything. And then lastly, I'd say as for our funds, if you commit to investing for a year on a systematic investment plan, you get a 20% discount on your sales cost. So those, I would say, are pretty healthy advantages of getting into a systematic investment plan.
Well, let's talk about ETF. ETF in developed market like New York or London is nothing new, right? But recently, Vietnam has a new ETF. What about VCBF? Are you guys going to have one?
You know, we've seen a lot of publicity in the last few weeks and months on ETFs. And ETFs, by definition, are passive funds.
Yep.
VCBF is a active manager.
I see.
So in the current plan, we do not envision launching an ETF product.
Okay.
Partly because we just look at investing as finding the best investments. An ETF essentially represents an index.
Yep.
So, and I'm not saying that's good or bad. What I'm saying is that we can't take advantage in an ETF. So in an ETF, if the market goes up, your ETF goes up. If the market goes down, your ETF goes down. Whereas in our fund, like I talked about, the example I gave you about in May, when the market goes down, if you've done your research well, you then have the ability to actually take advantage of that volatility, which is not something you can do in an ETF. And so we feel that there is a place in the market for ETFs, but that is not our focus. Our focus is more on creating long-term wealth for our clients and being able to take advantage of the volatility to create that wealth.
Well, thank you very much for coming on to the show and sharing your knowledge. I wish you the best at VCBF.
Thank you very much for having me and appreciate the good wishes.
Câu chuyện kinh doanh của chúng tôi đến đây là kết thúc. Cảm ơn quý vị đã quan tâm theo dõi. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại quý vị trong chương trình kỳ sau.